Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Beitz. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. My guest today, Nick Gaylord, had some ups and a few more downs in his relationship with his father, who passed away in 2021. This led Nick to reevaluate a few things which he's going to talk about today, with the main one being he started a podcast called Our Dead Dads. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, of course, we all face that inevitability of our fathers passing away. Mine passed away in 2022. I'm just curious now, was it sudden or was he ill for a while?
It was definitely not sudden. He was 73 years old. He had excuse me. He had a whole host of health problems. It started for him when he was 17. He was in a car accident. The another car kind of T-boned him. The car rolled over. He went through the windshield. He broke his hip, shattered his pelvis. He spent probably about a year in the hospital. This is back in 1965. Obviously medical care was not nearly as advanced as it was or as it is now. They fixed him up. They did everything that they needed to do. He had to learn how to basically do everything again: walk, eat, feed himself, put his clothes on, everything. But when he left the hospital, he was a brand new man. I have to say that as a child, I never saw any indication that there was anything going on from that car accident, from that hip. I mean, he had a sizable burn scar on one of his legs. I don't remember which one, but that was it. That was really the only indication. He had told us about the car accident, but there were no lingering physical effects. The doctors did tell him at that point, at some point later on in your life, you're going to pay for this, and hopefully there's better medical care then to take care of you. That probably started happening, I'd say, around early to mid 50s is when he first started noticing signs that his hip was beginning to degrade. He chose not to do anything about the hip. He had opportunities to have hip replacement surgery plenty of times in his life over the years. His excuse was, I'm afraid of the anesthesia. I don't know why. I know a lot of people are. That was his excuse. He worked in the medical field for a long time. He was an x-ray technician for 30 plus years, probably about 35 years. But for some reason, he just always said he was afraid of the anesthesia. Um, Coupled with many other things, as he got older, he became a little bit less active. He broke his ankle when he was 46, and he didn't rehab it properly. So unfortunately, that kind of stuck with him. In his mid 50s, he kind of changed careers. He didn't really have a choice. He went from being an x-ray technician to uh, driving a bus for a big charter bus company here, not here, on Long Island, where I used to live, in New York. Uh, but of course, that reduced his activity. He went from always being on his feet to sitting down all day long. And in the first, I'd say, year plus, he put on about 100 pounds.
Wow.
And that, of course, just accelerated everything. His parents had had some health history. His mom, before she passed, had two heart attacks, two strokes. She was type 2 diabetic. His dad passed from bone and colon cancer, neither of which he ended up having, so that was good, but the history was there. He had type 2 diabetes. He was anemic, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Aside from the hip replacement, he had kidney stones many times over the course of his life. Um, yeah, so he had the whole gauntlet of problems, and he unfortunately didn't want to listen to doctors a lot. He always thought that he was the smartest person in the room. He didn't want to take the advice of the doctors or the specialists when they were giving it, which frequently led us to say, "If you're not going to listen to the doctors, why are we taking you to the doctors?" But again, when you have somebody who's as arrogant and stubborn and thick-headed as he was, that's the end result. But yeah, that again, the health problems just kind of piled on top of each other, and he ended up the hip is what caused the most problems. For the last 5 or 6 months of his life, he unfortunately had to live in a long-term care facility, a nursing home, because he just could not take care of him. He couldn't take care of himself. He also had COPD because he was a smoker early in life. He quit on his 50th birthday. For the last 23 years of his life, he didn't have a single cigarette, but the damage was done. The COPD was there. Um, it got to the point that he couldn't even walk to the bathroom without being out of breath. So again, on top of the hip and everything else, I mean, he was a medical just disaster.
Yeah, wow. And then so with all this, with his passing, then things have happened with you, and you've come up with the idea of the podcast. And it's like, so what was the idea of the podcast? Like where's that come from?
Sure. So I should probably preface by saying that my dad and I had a very complicated relationship. As you mentioned, my podcast, Our Dead Dads, which actually just recently launched the first 3 full episodes.
Yeah,
If anybody wants to know
a
this,
couple of days ago,
oh,
I went in and found it, and so I've listened to, like, last night, half of one, because I'm thinking, you did tell me it's going to release really close around the time that we're going to do this. So I went in yesterday
right.
and checked, and I thought, oh, look, yeah, the day before the 3 episodes had dropped, and I wish I'd known the day before. Yeah.
That's okay. I appreciate you listening. Yeah, I tried putting it out there, and I actually meant to tell you because I knew that we were going to be recording this, so that if you had a chance. But for anybody else, without me spoiling too much, the very first episode goes into a lot of detail about me, my story with my dad, our relationship. It's a doozy. You might need a drink for that one. But again, the relationship was very complicated. When he
And just, I'm
passed,
going to ask you a question about that, because
sure.
that's the episode I've listened to half of it.
Yes.
You're the oldest child.
Yes, I'm the
Yes?
oldest of seven.
Okay. So did your 6 younger siblings have such a hard time with that as you?
So one of them he never knew, and that's because of divorced
I
from
heard
his
that bit.
fourth wife.
Yeah.
Right. And another one I really do not have a relationship with. Um, I honestly couldn't tell you what she went through. The other four, so my 3 brothers and my youngest sister. The 3 brothers are the ones who were featured on episode 2 of the podcast. My youngest sister, Helene, who's 17 years younger than I am, she will be an upcoming interview. I haven't recorded that one yet, but she's been asking me, and she will be an interview for sure. We definitely all went through a lot of the similar things. When he passed, the feelings for me were largely relief. I was relieved that he was not in pain anymore because, again, as I've already outlined, he was in pain, a lot of pain for a very long time, and nobody should have to physically deal with that. And I was glad that that was over. The other side of that relief coin was I was glad that the shit show was just over. We went through a lot with him over our entire lifetimes, and especially the last several years. And we were largely just relieved that that part of the nightmare was over. And yes, my 3 brothers do talk about it in pretty extensive detail. Um, we all remember, we think of a lot of the good things. There are a lot of things in all of our lives that are big parts of our lives because of him. He introduced us all to baseball. My brother Jack and I, my only full sibling, Jack is the next youngest. He and I are very big into movies because of my dad. We're all into professional wrestling, which, as I know, many people, it's you either love it or you hate it. It's kind of like opera. I am obsessed with professional wrestling, WWE. I've been watching it since I was 7 years old, and I will continue watching it until the day that I'm no longer here. Also, for me personally, meteorology, weather. When the Weather Channel launched here in the United States, and I think it was 1982, he had cable at that point. He had the Weather Channel, and we started watching it together. And I just got really fascinated by just how weather works. And he always had a love for it. That was one thing that we bonded over. Funny little story about the Weather Channel is that that channel is actually how I learned the geography of the United States. Because it would show, like, he would record it on his VCR, which anybody who's under the age of 30 probably doesn't know what one is. But he would record it and he would pause the screen, and we would just I would learn where all of the states were. And it got to the point where he would start quizzing me, and he would just yell out a state: Montana, Florida, New York, and I would just point to it on the TV. And like, at one point, it became a game for us. When he paused it, I think it would pause for like 5 minutes. And it got to the point we were trying to get through all of the states before it would unpause and resume playing again. So between that and, at the age of 7 or 8, whatever it was, and also just learning about weather, we would talk about hurricanes and blizzards. We would rattle off dates. I'm also I can't explain it, but I'm an insane numbers guy. I'm really, really good with numbers, with math. So those kind of details are easy for me to remember. As many other people would say, I don't care what day or how strong the hurricane. But for me and my dad, that was something that we bonded over. So, during the second episode of my show, we did talk a lot about the good times that were remembered and that we want to remember, that we want to hang on to. And we also spent a lot of time diving into what an absolute bastard he was. And it was unfortunate because he didn't have to be that way. I don't know why he was, and it wasn't all the time, but times he was good. And when he was good, he was really good. When he was bad, you just didn't want to be around him. He just made everybody and everything miserable. And it's sad because it didn't have to be that case. And unfortunately, he went through 5 marriages, 5 divorces. Difficult relationships at best with most of his 7 children. It's unfortunate. It really is. But basically, I know I rambled a little bit and I apologize. The whole premise of the podcast for me was about what I went through after his death. Again, it was not sadness and heartbreak. One of the big things that I discovered a few months after he died was I was angry. I was angry because of who he was, of how he was towards his children, toward his ex-wives, towards generally everybody. And a few months after he died, I was getting angry. I was just snapping, mostly, unfortunately, at my wife. And luckily, she was not throwing it back at me. She knew what was going on and said, "You need to talk to somebody." And I did. I found a therapist, and we did weekly sessions for 6 months. And at the end of it, I don't want to say I was cured, but I was a lot better. I got to the point where I forgave myself for being angry at him. I forgave him for being the person that he was. I forgave him for not being able to be the person that we all knew he could have been, the person that he had the gifts when he was younger to be and the potential to be. He just, for some reason, chose to be the way he was. But I was able to get past that. And since then, I've never been angry a day in the last like 2.5 years since then. So when we got to early 2024 and I was in between jobs, the idea about a podcast started to just kind of form in my mind. And I immediately knew that if I were to do something, I wanted to do something about grief and loss and trauma and moving past it, because that was a big process for me personally. It was something that pushed me way out of my comfort zone to talk about in therapy. I'll talk about just about anything, but if I have to talk about myself to a therapist, it's not easy. And at this point, it's easier because I've been doing it so much. At the time, it wasn't. And I realized that therapy is so necessary. I mean, holy hell, all of us, for something or another reason, need to be in therapy. We can all benefit so much from talking to somebody. And if you don't want to be in therapy, just having someone to talk to. I've been the person many times over the years where a friend or a coworker or a family member has come up to me and said, "Hey, can we just talk for a few minutes? I've got some stuff that I just really need to get off my chest. I need to unload. I just need someone to talk to." Yeah, no problem. And the common denominator after all of those conversations is that the person that I was talking to always felt better at the end. And even with me during my therapy process, starting with the first session, yeah, I hated it. It sucked, but I did feel a little bit better. And each week, even as we got into the more difficult parts of the conversations, I still felt a little bit better and a little bit better. And I know from people that I've known over the years that have dealt with grief, that have just been crushed under the weight of the grief that they are experiencing because they don't know how to start the conversation. Some people think that therapy is not for them. Some people will say, I don't need to talk about it. I'm fine. I'm just going to move past it. It's all good. Whatever they want to say. It isn't all good. You're not, if you try to move past it and just forget about it, if you try to ignore it until it goes away, it will not go away. It's that simple. It is not easy to talk about these things, but grief and loss is something that every single one of us has dealt with. Like this is not, a small exclusive group. This affects everybody that you and I know and everybody that you and I don't know. So that's why I decided to go with this platform, because I'm trying to bring together the group of people who are willing to talk about their stories. In fact, I've already interviewed you for the show. And again, thank you so much for being willing to tell me your story. And your episode is coming up in, I can't remember the exact date, but it is on the calendar. So everybody listen for Doug's episode as well. I think it's going to be sometime in August. I'll get back to you with the exact date. But aside from the people that are willing, like you were, to tell stories of what they went through, I'm also looking for the people that are not willing to tell their stories, but might be willing to listen. If you're willing to just be part of the podcast and don't judge, don't come in with misconceptions and ideas that this is going to be a bullshit podcast and this is going to be, I don't need to hear other people talking about their grief. If you have nothing going on in your life and no grief to experience, then maybe you don't. That's fine. But if you have dealt with things that you haven't figured out how to process, whether you haven't processed them fully or you haven't begun to process them at all, then yeah, maybe you do need to come just listen. Just listen to other people tell their stories. Start by listening to me tell my story. And I did my story as episode number 1 intentionally, because what I'm doing on this podcast is I'm asking everybody to make themselves incredibly vulnerable and tell a very personal side of their lives. I mean, I've already talked to a few people that told me up front that the story that they were telling, they haven't told almost anybody. I talked to a lady a few weeks ago who she's been podcasting on her own for a few years. And she said, the story that I'm about to tell, like almost nobody knows this. And that's huge because she talks to people all the time, but she hasn't put her own story out there. And when her episode is released, it will. And again, she's not the only one. And again, the common denominator of every single person that I have interviewed has been that they felt better, that they appreciated what I'm doing and why I'm trying to do it. I don't know. I mean, this isn't, perfection. I'm not a trained therapist. I didn't go to school for this, but I do have real life experience. And I believe that if I can introduce a platform that is authentic, if it's talking about real life topics, yeah, as I say in my intro, this is not sexy to talk about. This isn't something that a lot of people are going to flock immediately to talk about. This isn't a political podcast or a sports podcast or something that we would much rather be talking about. I totally get that. But this is still something that a lot of people need to be talking about, or at least need to be listening in on. And for the people that aren't willing to have those conversations yet, if you are willing to listen, I believe that you're going to come in and you're going to realize, just by listening to everybody else opening up their stories, that whatever you have dealt with in your life, whatever you are still dealing with in your life, you will realize you're not alone. You are not unique. You're not special because you lost a parent or a loved one or a child or a best friend or whatever it may be. We have all gone through it. Your story is incredible because it's yours. But just because you're going through it, you're not an anomaly. We are all in this together. And that is why I decided to do this platform. And again, I mean, it just launched, so I don't know where this is going to go or, what this will turn into. I mean, I can say that even though only 3 episodes have been released, I have already done, I think, 16 interviews. I've got another probably 8 or 10 either on the calendar or being planned. So basically, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I am in this for the long haul. And yes, I do have a full-time day job. So this is basically my second job. And I'm doing this as, I'm putting in whatever time this takes because I feel that passionately. I have always, for my entire life, I've always wanted to help people. I wanted to be a math teacher early on in life because I'm so good with numbers, because I love teaching math, because I love just working with people in math. I mean, I had a college class, a math class, I think it was pre-calc. By the end of the class, I ended up tutoring almost half the class because they just weren't getting it with the professor. And sometimes you just need to help people and realize that there's more than one way to get to the equation. The professor is going to stand up there and say, you need to do it this way. Grief is the same way. There is not one way through anything that we're going through. Grief is not linear. For all the therapists and all the books and all the videos and all the programs, there's no one answer. Some of those will work. Maybe many of them will work. I'm not saying that anything that's out there isn't good or it isn't effective. I'm just saying that not everything works for everybody on the same timeline. But the one common thing that nobody's going to get to the finish line without doing is taking the first step and starting the conversation. You can read all the books, you can talk to all the therapists you want, but once the therapists are done talking and once you finish reading the book, you have to start talking. It's almost like, I mean, some people have kind of compared this to like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous or something like that, where you can have the biggest support group possible, but until you start doing the work, nothing's going to get fixed.
That's right. So I'm curious,
so that's
Nick,
what I'm trying to put out there.
What you've been talking about, you went to 6 months of therapy once a week. Mm-hmm. You did that, and that was helpful. Now you've spent the last few months interviewing people. Mm-hmm. Can you compare that personally? Do you feel better? Do you feel like they were therapy sessions because you're voicing things as well? Do you feel better after you have these conversations?
Oh, it's not even a question. I didn't start thinking about it that way at first. And then a few of the people that I was interviewing, and especially in the last week, as we've been getting close to launch, people have asked me, has this been therapeutic for you? And so, in the especially in the last few weeks, I've been thinking it really has. When my dad had first passed, my wife and I, we both grew up in New York, but we were living in Texas at the time. We flew back to New York. We had the funeral. We spent a few days there. We went home, got back to life. And after everything that I dealt with my dad, I, at that time, was honestly happy to just not think about him, because I was glad that I was finally at a point where I wasn't making half a dozen phone calls to doctors or dealing with the nursing home or whatever it may have been that pretty much consumed the last 6 months of his life. I was
And did you do more of that because you were the oldest son, like dealing with nursing homes, etc.?
I mean, I was his healthcare proxy, so a lot of it, unfortunately, in that part did fall on me. I had to work directly with the nursing home to get him on Medicaid because of his when he was dealing with, when he first went into the nursing home, it was considered a rehab assignment, but he just didn't want to do the work. I think largely he couldn't, but he also kept saying, I'm doing the work, because he was trying to regain his strength. In his eyes, or in his head, he was going back home. He was going back to his apartment. He didn't want to live there. He hated it, which I get. I totally get. Nobody wants to live in a long-term facility. But in his mind, he was going back home. So we said, well, if you're going to do that, you need to do the work. You need to get your strength up so that you can do what you need to do at home and do it on your own. Because, I mean, private care is so expensive. We couldn't afford it. He couldn't afford it. So I said, the only way that you're going back home is if you get your strength back up. But he never did. He didn't do the work. And because he didn't do the work, his primary insurance canceled his policy. 2 weeks later, his secondary insurance canceled his policy. Like, they gave him a few months, but at a certain point, they were like, guy's not doing the work. We're not going to pay for this. I don't blame them. It sucked for my dad, but I don't necessarily blame the insurance companies. They're not going to pay for something that just isn't going to come to fruition with anything at all. Like if he's not going to do the work, why should they pay for it in their eyes? So after he passed, and I tried for a while not to think about it, when the anger started coming up a few months later, it was because he was creeping into my mind more and more, and I didn't want to be thinking about him. I wanted to just move on, as I've said. Like I wanted to forget about it until it went away. Very quickly realized, because of how angry I was getting, because I was getting so irritable, it wasn't going to go away. And that's when my wife said, you need to talk to somebody. So I did that, moved on, let go of the anger, still thought about him, but never in a bad way. I mean, I thought about all the ridiculous shit that he did, but I wouldn't get angry about it afterwards. Since I've been doing this podcast in the last 4 months and change, all the work that I've done, in advance of the launch to just build the platform that I really wanted, all the people that I have been talking to, yes, this has been incredibly therapeutic for me, because in each interview, a little piece of my story comes up as well. I mean, I try not to hijack the conversation, but yeah, sometimes there's going to be a comparison with my dad to whatever my guest is talking about. So without even trying, my dad is going to pop into my head every single day, especially as I've been doing this podcast. And I've been finding more and more that I mind it less and less. It doesn't bother me.
So your emotional state is like, we'll say pre and post podcast, meaning your podcast, pre being last year, post
Right.
being today, like you've just launched it, your emotional state around your father and around life in general, better?
Is so much better.
Yeah.
I really can't believe that I've gotten to the point where I can think about my dad as many times a day as I do and not get irritated at him, not think, you asshole. I don't think that anymore. I think about the things that I think about, and it's impossible to not think about the bad things. Again, I try to think about the good things. The hardest part for me, I would say, in the last 4 months in this process of doing this podcast, was recording episode number 1, which I actually recorded it 3 months ago, but I wasn't happy with it. And I ended up re-recording it last weekend, like 3 days before it was going to be released, because I knew that I needed to include a lot more stuff. I needed to really do a deep dive. And so as I'm making the notes, as I'm getting ready to record it, I'm not going to lie, there were a few times while I was saying what I was saying that I was not happy about it. But honestly, once the mic was off, once the recording stopped, I was good. I went, even during the editing process, because I have to like edit and clean it up a little bit. I was fine. Like I was just in editing mode, and I realized, I'm not angry anymore. I don't want to use the word cured, but to be able to get to a place after what I went through, I would say is pretty remarkable. And again, this is not a pissing contest. I will never compare my grief to anybody else's grief, or let anybody compare their grief to anyone else's grief. It is not about that. It is not a competition. It is every person that tells their story. That is the focus. When we did your interview for my show, it was about what Doug went through. It wasn't about what anybody else went through, or anybody that I know went through, or really even what I personally went through. It was your story. That was the focus. And I love having these conversations to be able to give somebody the platform to say what they need to say, and to hear everybody tell their stories. First of all, it is a tremendous honor for me to hear these stories, for people to be willing to tell some of their most personal details about their life to me. And especially some people that, as they've said, have really never put this out there publicly to anybody. And they're doing it for me for the opportunity to basically share it to the world because it's therapeutic for them. So this entire process it, it has only been in the last few weeks that I've realized just how therapeutic it's been and how much more it has helped. And I really look, some of these stories are emotional and they're tough to hear, but at the end of it, I think about why I'm doing this and I think about how much everybody has been telling me that this has been helping them. And I know that I am exactly where I need to be.
There are some people on the planet, Nick, that only have one other person on the planet who can help them
Right.
get through stuff. And there might be two of those people on the planet, or there might be 22 or 22 million of them. And you're the only person who is on this planet who can help them. So I would say to you, at the beginning of this year, when you got that thought
Mhm.
for to do this, to start the podcast, I'll be bold enough to say, I believe your intuition put that inkling, that thought into your mind, that vision.
Mhm.
You saw something. However it came, it doesn't matter how it came. For
Right.
some reason, you were open to it. You received it, but then you acted on it. All right, because it's one thing to have. So you right now could be like, I don't know if you drink alcohol or not, but let's do
Occasionally, a little
occasionally.
bit.
Okay, but let's say you would have average of one beer a day, like last year. Right
Well, we'll go
now,
with whiskey because I actually hate
whiskey.
beer.
Okay, yeah, a glass of whiskey once
Sure.
every afternoon after work, whatever. Right now,
Right.
instead of doing this podcast, you could be at half a bottle of whiskey every afternoon after work.
Sure.
And in 2 years' time, it could be a bottle of whiskey after work
Right.
every day because of a choice. Because you could be sitting there being eaten up inside right now
Yeah.
by a feeling of the word podcast could be coming up and you're going, it's too hard, too scary, I couldn't be doing it. But you had the guts to
Right.
follow it. And now part of the reason is it's therapy for you. And the better you feel, the better you're going to make other people feel. And, hence with the podcast, I'm out trying to help men make
Right.
one better decision a day by
Right.
following their intuition. And on one day earlier this year in 2024, you made a better decision. You chose to do that. And it was a big decision, but
It
with
was.
big, with occasionally our intuition pushes us to higher limits. the
Sure.
rewards are the rewards are greater. Things that are harder to do. I've had plenty of things that are super easy, just like, whatever, which pair of shoes am I going to buy? But I've had other things that have been life-changing for me in an amazing way that have changed the ripple effect have changed many other people's lives for the better. Like that
Yep.
years later, I realized it's not
Right.
nothing I set out to do. It was just a ripple effect that I couldn't change. It did it. So yeah, it's amazing. And I think as time goes on, not pissing in your pocket, but you'll realize that and it could be just a handful of people that only you can reach, or it could be a lot
Exactly.
more. And there'll be
Right.
some people who could be reached through you or reached other ways. But there's the threads and the tapestry of life. It's an amazing, amazing thing. So it's yeah, and you're now getting the benefit. Your emotional state's better. You're able
Yeah.
to communicate this message, get it out there, and articulate it in a great way. And yeah, like I'm hoping this goes really well for you, that it spreads out. But also know too, if it like you start getting 3 people a week listen to your podcast, and you
Mhm.
look at your statistics and you're like down in the mouth and you're like, what's going on here? Like, why have I only had 3 people listen to it? What's going on?
Right.
Doesn't matter.
No.
It's out there. It's like I get a bit woo-woo on things. The fact that right now you and I are verbalizing this conversation, the frequency of our voices is vibration, and it's vibrating into the universe right now. These words are being spoken and they will have an effect. It can seem like not much is happening, like when you plant a seed and you go out and you check it and it doesn't appear to be growing too well.
Right.
But, you know, you
One
sell
day
the
you're going to
house.
go out there and
Well,
it's going to sprout above the ground.
or you sell the house, move interstate, and then you see a photo of the house 30 years later and you're like, holy jeez, look at that that's magnificent. Like, I thought it would die. I didn't even think it was there. Like, there was nothing. Or someone tells you,
Right.
Nick, I drove past your whole house last week. Whoa. And you're like, oh, I haven't been past it in 30 years. You know, like, dude, remember that tree you planted? You thought it died? The people must have planted another one. No, it's yours. Like, it took a long time to come to fruition. You know, you might be
It
dead and
does.
gone, and then something happens amazing from it, you know. Or that little tree, it lived long enough to sprout one seed, and that went, someone put that in a pot and took it interstate, and, you know, something amazing happened. So yeah, the numbers can seem wonderful. And plus, if you start to get 10,000 downloads a day, you think, oh, I'm awesome, everything's great. It depends who's listening to them, you know, like it, or what effect they're having. So yeah, it's the fact that you are becoming a better human being, not that you weren't a great human being before, but now your frequency, your vibe that you give off to people is just better. People are happier to be around you. You got children?
I do not. It's
No.
just my wife and I. We have a cat.
You have a cat? Yeah.
An
Well,
18-year-old. Yeah, an 18-year-old calico. And luckily she doesn't have much emotional baggage.
yeah. Well, you know, she would if you started coming home with half a bottle of whiskey under your belt before you come home, and you give her a kick
She sure
before you
would.
come in the door. You know, because that's one of
Right.
my little things. Like, we're also contributing to the cats of the world not getting kicked. You know, because we made bad decisions today, and we come home and kick the cat on the way in the door.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a great thing you're doing, mate.
Yeah.
A wonderful thing.
I really appreciate that so much. And you know, you are right. You're dead on about the numbers. For me, this is not a numbers game. I didn't get in this to become rich. I didn't. And by the way, anybody who ever decides to start a podcast, if you decide to start a podcast because you want to make a shitload of money, you are doing it for the dumbest reason possible. I'm not saying that you're not going to make a lot of money one day. I'm just saying you're doing it for the wrong reason. Unless if you're getting into, like I said before, like hot button topics like sports or politics or religion. There are plenty of those podcasts out there. And it's not, that personally is not me. I knew that if I was going to do something like this, it needed to be meaningful. Again, I've got a full-time job. I've got a wife who I love. I love my house. I've got an amazing backyard with a pool, and it's 92 degrees outside, and the pool water is great. And yeah, I could go get a drink and go swim. And I could have been doing that for the last several months. And my wife has given me the grace to do this, and she's been amazing about it. She has not given me an ounce of grief about doing this or the time that it has taken. And it really has become a second full-time job, at least up until the launch, because I wanted to get a certain number of episodes completely done, recorded, edited, ready to go before day one ever happened. That's why it took me 4 months to get to the launch point. And I also, you know, going forward, I can ease up a little bit because I've got a buffer. You know, I have several episodes kind of like in the bank that I'm just going to release one a week and continue to produce one a week and keep talking to everybody during the whole process. And hopefully this will continue to flow. But as far as the numbers go, as far as the number of downloads, I don't care. I'm not looking at that. Sure, I hope they continue to go up. Well, I mean, you know, before week one, there was nothing, so they really have nowhere to go but up. But I'm not looking to necessarily be, you know, I don't know who any popular the really top podcasters in Australia are, but like here, you know, Joe Rogan or Pat McAfee or any of the ridiculously popular top podcasts. Look, if that ever happens, it'll be amazing. That's not why I'm doing this. If I'm doing this to help people, and as you said, if I find 3 people who are dedicated to what I'm doing and are willing to listen and are willing to tell people about it and say, look, you should give this guy a chance. Like he's on to something. He's really doing a good thing here. He's covering great topics. He's helping people. You should definitely give him a chance. if I can get a few people to spread that kind of a message, then sure, could, each week it'll be another 1 or 2 or 3, or however many listeners. And, maybe that will just grow a little bit more and a little bit more. And maybe 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now, this might be something really significant. It might not. But again, that's not why I'm doing this. I am doing this because of this fire inside of me that I've always had to want to help people. I've been working in the pharmaceutical clinical trial industry for going on 30 years now. I've started when I was 19, and it is rewarding because we're helping people that are waiting for drugs that could be life-changing. There are companies that are doing a lot of research and development that they're creating drugs that are helping possibly cancer and so many other just horrible terminal conditions. And so I'm not doing it on my own. I'm one tiny little piece of a very large machine that I do believe is helping a lot of people in the world. The thought that I had when it got to January of 2024, when I found myself out of a job, and the reason I found myself out of a job is I was working as a contractor for a large company, and at the end of the year, they just decided, we're cutting a lot of contracts. We're going to be cutting back. We're not renewing it. Thank you for everything. And it is what it is. That's the risk I take when working contracts, and I've been doing that for the last 4 years. So I had to find another job, but at the same time, it gave me a little bit of time to think about, is there something else I want to do? And again, my wife gave me, over the last few years when we had moved from New York to Texas, my wife had a job that she had for 12 years. And at a certain point, she got laid off. And then she was a chef. She's a chef. She was working for a big food delivery company in New York City. When that ended, she started her own catering business. And for 3 years in Texas, it was insanely successful. When we moved to Florida, she shut the business down because the biggest thing that ran that business was the people, the customers. It was our circle of friends that just expanded into so many more. She would have had to start it from ground zero if we moved here. And she also said that as much as she loved it, that was also the hardest those 3 years were the hardest that she's worked in her entire life. And she was ready to move on to something else. Now she, almost a year ago, she started a travel agent business, and that is becoming wildly successful. And, she had said, I guess because of the job that I had, was paying the bills, and gave her the opportunity to start those businesses. And she said, look, if this is something you want to do it. And she and a couple of other people said, look, if by the time you find a real, a full-time job, if it's too much, if you need to take a step back from it, take a step back from it. I took a podcasting class earlier this year, and anybody who has listened to the intro and episode number 1, you'll hear more about that class. The lady that got me into that class, she told me in the very beginning, in like early February, you've got the voice for this. You've got the passion. You've got an incredible idea. You've got something that can really get big. And I was worried about not doing it then because of the financial aspect of it, because I wasn't working. I wasn't bringing in money. I knew it was going to be a financial investment to get this started, equipment, software, etc. And I said, even paying for the class. And I said, I really want to do the class, but I feel like I need to just wait until I'm working. And she said, look, if you wait to do this until you have a full-time job, you will be so busy with the job, you'll come up with 100 reasons not to do the class then, and you'll never do it. And I have to tell you, she was right.
And the job wasn't going to provide therapy for you. Wasn't going to make you emotionally feel better.
No, not at all. I mean, I have a new job and I love my job. I have great coworkers and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, but it's the same work that I've been doing largely for the last 3 decades. And I mean, I love doing it. I'm really good at it. And again, it does provide me that sense of a little bit of accomplishment because I'm a small piece of the very big puzzle that's helping people. But this is entirely different. This is what I've been looking for without even knowing it for my entire adult life. I've been trying to figure out what to do after I knew that I wasn't going to be a math teacher. I was already several years into this industry and it worked out. What started as, kind of convenience turned into a career. And I mean, when I was in the beginning of this career, if somebody had told me then that this career, this industry would take me from New York to Texas, then to Florida. And as much as I've moved up, the things that I've done in this industry, I would have laughed. I would have said there's no possible way, but it has. But again, for me personally, it was as rewarding as it wasn't fulfilling my desire to personally make a difference. This has done that. And you know, 4 months ago when I did make the decision to start this, I had no way of knowing if this was going to work. And look, I still don't know if this is going to work because again, it's week one. I've released 3 episodes. So I don't know if 6 months from now, a year from now, if this is going to be something that's going to be successful. But what I do know is I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, whether people listen or not. Hopefully they do, because the work that I'm trying to do, the message that I'm trying to put out there is a critical one for so many people who need the help, for so many people who need to start the conversation, who need a person to talk to, who need to listen to others, who need to be in a safe space where they're not going to be judged because of the grief that they're going through. They're not going to be judged for anything. This is for people that have a negative outlook on this, who think, oh, I don't need to talk about this shit, I don't need to hear about it, then you know what? That's fine. Do you? And you don't have to listen. It's okay. This podcast is not going to be for everybody. This is not easy stuff to talk about or to listen to other people talk about. Or for if you get to the point where you're going to talk about it yourself, that's the hardest part of it. Yeah. But if anybody needs to be in this world, then the door is always open. And I really hope that people will give me a fair shake at this, will come in and listen to what other people have to talk about. Because even if you don't end up going through some of the things that these people are talking about right now, or if you don't go through them for a long time, just to hear what a lot of these folks have gone through. For you, Doug, talking about what you went through, it is inspiring to listen to. I mean, I held the interviews, I conducted the interviews, and then I listened to them again as I was editing. And yeah, it was more about editing, but I'm still listening to and absorbing all of the things that everyone is talking about. And it's mind-blowing how rewarding this is to just be a part of someone's life who's willing to put this out there. Yeah. And to just be able to be in an environment like this where there is a chance to help people. And I'm not trying to be a millionaire and get 10 million listeners. If it happens, that's phenomenal. That's not why I'm in this game. I'm in this game to help people. Yeah. And I hope that I can make a difference for anyone who's listening. If you want to be, if you just want to just put your foot in the door and just listen for a little while, awesome. There is a website that's being worked on. It's under construction. It will be up very soon. Hopefully, maybe by the time this episode gets published, it will be closer, or hopefully it will be up. It's going to be ourdeaddads.com. There's going to be contact forms in there. There's going to be a way that you can you can fill out a form and submit your story if you want to be considered to, be a guest on this show. And hopefully I can get through everyone and I can talk to everyone who wants to be part of it. And at the same time, if you don't have a story to tell, or if you just don't really want to tell your story, if you don't want to dive into that personal of the details, that's cool too. But listening does help. It does make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I promise you, someone who's going through things. I'll give a little bit of a sneak preview. This is an episode that isn't going to air probably till August or September. This is a gentleman that I was put in touch with through a friend of mine on Long Island. There's a gentleman who runs a grief camp on Long Island. It's for a camp for children ages 7 to 17 who have lost a parent or a sibling. And this camp it's all about grief and bereavement services, helping them cope and get past this. The kids help each other because they're all in the same boat. They've all been through the same things. And he's been doing this type of work for 20 years. He started this camp 4 years ago. And I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and I am so excited to get that episode out there and every episode that I've done. There are so many incredible people that I have talked to. Like I want to release every episode immediately, just to get them out there so that people can hear what's going on and how badly I believe these conversations are needed to be mainstream topics. Because for so many years, from almost my entire life, especially growing up, this shit was taboo. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, when I was a kid in junior high school and high school, if any of those kids were in therapy, nobody knew about it because nobody talked about it. Now, at least the younger generation is starting to get a little bit better. The generation before me and the generation before them and before them, it was a nightmare. Nobody wanted to talk about it. When my dad was a kid, he was an only child of two Greek parents. They lived in New York City and they moved out to Long Island. It was my grandmother's job to run the family. It was my grandfather's job to provide. He was a chef. He commuted into New York City 5 or 6 days a week. It was his job to pay for everything for the family. It was her job to hold the family together. He didn't have time to have conversations with his son about grief or feelings or emotions. You know, and back in those days, really nobody did. And if they did, they had other things to deal with. You know, it was a much lighter world back then. But now we're quickly finding out that people have a lot of shit in their head. And it really is okay to just talk about it.
They do.
That's the message I'm trying to put out there. If you can't talk about it, my first question is, why the hell not? What is really stopping you? Most of the time, the thing that's stopping you, and I don't mean you, I mean talking to anybody, the thing that's stopping you from talking about things is you. So knock that wall down. Just start the conversation. Just be willing to think about what's on the other side of this grief. If you just take step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3, eventually you're going to feel better. If you do nothing, all it's going to do is build and build until it explodes, like it was starting to do with me. Luckily, my wife saw what was going on and intervened real quick.
Yeah. Back in 2017, I traveled to California and did a 5-day energy clearing class. And the facilitator started to talk to us. She said, there's only 2 times in our life where our energy in our body is balanced. The moment of our birth and the moment of our death.
Moment of our death.
In between, it's off kilter. But what she taught us to do is balance it, bring it back into balance as much as we could. We can't perfect it.
No.
So
No.
I'll say to you, when you made the choice at the beginning of this year to start the podcast, when you were having that conversation with the lady who was talking to you about to do the podcasting course, etc., or not, you made a decision there, and that decision helped bring your life a little bit back more into balance, because I believe your intuition was telling you to start the podcast. And her words of, if you wait till you get a job and you've got income again to pay for all the toys you were going to want to buy to help with the podcast, that, you know, she's right. You would be back out of balance again. And I'm not saying your job's put you out of balance, but your job doesn't put you in balance.
No.
Right. So I'm not...
The job gives us the money to do the things and to buy the things and to pay the bills.
Exactly.
That's about it.
It brings in money, and money is just energy. And so energetically, you helped bring yourself back in balance by following your intuition. And that's, you know, that's a really big thing that you've helped to do. And you can still go off balance. We do, and you're not perfect. We're never perfectly balanced again, but we're swaying in and out, and there's things we can do that help us, you know, and the therapy of you talking to people all the time, seeking people out, listening to the conversations, being part of the conversation, sharing your energy with people in the world is, very, very beneficial, and to you. And then it helps other people balance their energy when they start to feel better after they've listened to a conversation you've had with someone new that week. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. I hope that will happen. And again, as I said earlier, I'm not cured. I'm never going to consider myself cured. I think that's a dumb word. It's just, I've improved. And I have off days, I have bad days like everybody else. But then, as you said, I think that's a great analogy that you used. Find the balance. You, you have to be able to find the balance, not just in grief, and everything that you do in life. Everything is a very delicate balance. And the stupidest little thing can throw it way out of balance if we let it.
Yeah.
But
I'm just going to ask you
it's
another
also,
question. Sorry, there you go.
I was going to say it's largely it can throw things out of balance, but it's also about all the choices that we make. Choose not to let grief just pollute your life and just fill your head and not be able to get out of your own way. Just make the choice to have a better day, to improve one thing, even if that one thing is having the first part of a conversation about what you're going through. I promise you, to everybody who is listening to this, if you think that you can talk to a person and say to any person that you know, or even if you don't know, if you go to a complete stranger and say, "Can I talk to you? I need to talk for a few minutes." Nobody's going to say no. And if they do, you don't need that person around. I promise you, people, as busy as everybody is, when somebody knows that their fellow humans are in trouble and in distress, people are more willing than most of us know to help out. So I really just ask everyone, if you're going through some stuff, just start the conversation with anybody, with me, with Doug, with a friend, with a spouse, a sibling, whoever you can. Just start the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
sorry, Doug. I didn't mean
yeah,
to
you're right,
interrupt
mate.
you before. Please.
I'm going to ask another question that seems off topic, but I think it's on
Okay.
topic.
Fire
At this
away.
moment in your life right now, what's your biggest fear?
My damn, my biggest fear. Um, wow, that's a really good question. I think I can safely say it is not being proud of who I am. Not being, and not because of how much money I've earned or what kind of a car I drive. Being able to look myself in the mirror every morning when I get up and brush my teeth, and every night before I go to bed when I brush my teeth, and just know that while I do have some things that I may need to work on, and I am far from perfect, knowing that I'm a good person. I've got an incredible family who I love and who loves me, and just knowing how lucky I am of all the gifts that I've got in life. And I guess I would just be afraid that I would misuse those or misuse my own potential. We I don't know if I'm communicating that right, but I don't want my life to, I don't want to be on my deathbed and think back and think that I've wasted my life.
Yeah.
And I have to say that if I can continue doing all the things that I am currently doing in my life, my wife, my family, my siblings, obviously working, this podcast, and just trying to be a good person. Like, again, I'm going to have bad days. Everybody's going to have bad days. I also believe that every day that we wake up is another chance to get it right. So I'm going to do the best I can with, whether I've got one day left or 10,000 days left. I want to do the best that I can. I guess my biggest fear is what my dad had at the end of his life, a shit ton of regret. All he had was regret. I don't want that.
Yeah. And it's good you're able to recognize that and see that and do something about it. All right, I got one
Hope so.
last question for you. I'm going to read
Go for
out.
it.
It's a big one. If you thought that was a big one, why did you hear this one?
Oh, great.
Well, you might think this is an easy one. I don't know. Most people think
Okay.
it's a big one. If your
I do not have the winning
microphone,
lottery numbers.
okay, if your microphone was connected to all 8.1 billion people on the planet right now, and you knew they wouldn't judge, blame, or shame you for anything you said, what would you say to them, Nick?
Be a good human. Help anybody that you can. I don't care what anybody's political beliefs are, religious beliefs are, personal beliefs are. I really don't. I appreciate everything that everybody has in their lives, whether it's, their religion or their family values, whatever they may be. I'm glad that everybody has those things because everybody should. But there is so much wrong with this world right now. And at the same time, there is so much right with this world because we all have choices to make every single day. And I believe that everybody, again, nobody's perfect. Everybody has slips. I would say try to make a conscious effort to, even if you do one thing a day, to be a better person, then do it. Whether you can help somebody, whether you can, I don't know, give somebody who's homeless on the street a few bucks, or buy somebody a lunch, or sit down and listen to somebody for 15 minutes who needs to talk and not look at your phone every minute and think, oh shit, I'm late. I gotta go. I can't be here. Don't be so selfish. Think about how you can change somebody else's world rather than thinking about what you can be doing to change your own world. Because if you can help somebody change their world, you are changing your world. But we are an incredibly busy, focused, and selfish society in a lot of ways. And at the same time, we've seen the best side of humanity. And if I could, have the world's attention, I would say keep it up. Just keep doing good things. Be good people, be good humans for yourselves, for your family, for people that you don't know. Just there's no reason not to. There's no reason not to be a good person. You don't have to think that your beliefs are the best around or the best in the world and that you're right and everybody else is wrong, regardless of what the topic is. Because at the end of the day, yeah, you have to go home and you have to look in the mirror. And at that moment, it is all about you. But there are so many times throughout the rest of the day where it's just not. And it doesn't have to be. Do what you need to do for yourself and for your family, but do for others too.
Yeah.
It's simple and it's also extraordinary at the same time.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well said. Well, mate, we're going to have all of the long list of social media and ways that people can contact you in the show notes. You said it was a long list, and it is reasonable. I'm impressed that you've got all that together. You got your stuff together, mate.
Well, I mean, I had to keep myself busy. I had 4 months to prepare. I couldn't
Yeah.
just, sit around and play video games.
Yeah, so that's all going to be in there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So any final thing we haven't talked about that you want to cover?
I think we've pretty much covered it all. Again, I'm honored for to have the opportunity for all the amazing people that I've spoken with on my show, yourself included. I am just as honored, maybe even more so, to be part of your show and I'm so thankful and appreciative for you giving me the opportunity to come on here and talk to your listeners. We are all doing amazing things. Your show is incredible. I hope that everyone out there just gets something. If you take anything from my message, just work on yourself like when you need to. If you're going through some things, it's okay that you're going through some things. Just talk to somebody about it. Doug's got an incredible show. If you don't want to talk to me, you've been listening to, if you've gotten this far in Doug's show, you've been listening to him. Reach out to Doug, talk to Doug, talk to somebody that you know, talk to somebody that you don't know. Just do what you need to do. Take care of your, I said before, take care of other people and take care of yourself. If you can't take care of other people if you don't take care of yourself. And I just hope that everybody can find a way to understand that grief does happen and it really is okay. We're all going to go through loss. And, this isn't even all about the loss of a person. Grief can come in so many forms. Whether it's the loss of a friendship or the loss of a relationship, you break up with somebody, or the loss of a job or a house, life savings. I mean, it isn't just about death. There's something that I discovered, that I learned rather in my therapy, is everything has room to be grieved. It doesn't matter what you're going through in life. If you need to grieve something, then do it. Just do it. It's that simple. Don't hide it. Don't tuck it away. Don't pretend it doesn't exist, because all you will do is more harm than good.
So it doesn't have to be a person. It could be loss of a job, loss of a friendship, loss of
a friendship,
a pet,
a job, a
whatever.
pet.
Yeah.
I mean, look, my my little beast over there. My cat Maxie, who has she's made a few appearances on the podcast. She'll come up on the desk during the interviews, and I've talked about her.
Yep.
She's 18 years old. We've had her since she was 6 weeks old. I know that I know how lucky we are to have her this long, and she's in amazing health. The only two things really that are, I guess, off with her is she lost her hearing probably about 5 years ago, which hasn't bothered her much. And she's been on thyroid medication because she had a hyperactive thyroid. Other than that, she's in amazing health. But I also know I've had cats most of my life, and I know that we need to be so grateful for every day that we have with her, because hopefully she'll live another 10 years. But I also know that that's not the overly likelihood. But just because she doesn't go out and get a job, and she doesn't contribute to the financial aspect of the household, if anything, she takes from it, because she's the litter box and the food. But you know what, it doesn't matter, because she's our baby, and we will do anything for her. When that day comes, I know that that's going to be a horrible day for us, and we will get past it. My wife and I will lean on each other. I will probably talk about it on the podcast at some point, when again, hopefully years from now. But anything can be grieved, and everything that needs to be grieved should be grieved in its own way.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, mate. That's awesome. A wonderful message for the listeners of hope and how to move on with life. Be brave enough to open your mouth and have a conversation with someone. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
thanks, Nick.
The only thing that I've got right now that's awesome is you. You truly are amazing. I love that you're doing this. And again, I'm so grateful for you for having me on this show and just getting to talk to you and talk to everybody. I loved our first conversation. I've loved this conversation. And again, I'm truly appreciative for your time, for allowing me the time to say what I wanted and needed to say. And I hope that this is far from our last conversation.
Awesome. No worries. Thanks, Nick. See you later.
Thank you, Doug.
Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.